Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, futures are falling this morning after President Donald Trump unleashed his final round of tariff announcements on countries around the world hours before his August 1st deadline. The president slapped 35% tariffs on Canadian goods not covered under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Switzerland's products were hit with a 39% rate, and Taiwan's exports are facing a 20% duty, though that country says it expects to keep negotiating. We get more from Bloomberg News global trade editor Brendan Murray.
The bottom line here is that the average U.S. tariff rate is going from about 2.5% before Trump was sworn in January to around 15%, according to Bloomberg Economics. And that's, in any economist's book, a difficult thing for an economy to absorb. So I think we'll see some more talks going on in the days and weeks ahead.
Bloomberg's Brendan Murray says most countries are facing a baseline 10% rate, while roughly 40 nations are jumping to 15%. The new tariffs won't take effect until August 7th to give U.S. Customs and Border Protection time to prepare. Former U.S. trade negotiator Stephen Olson says that could add to market uncertainty.
We do have a week to go. And this is a man who thrives on chaos and unpredictability and sometimes seems to be running his trade policy like a reality TV show. So until these tariffs actually go into effect on August 7th, let's sit back and see what happens.
Former trade negotiator Stephen Olson says President Trump has embraced tariffs for decades, so these moves should not come as a surprise.
Well, Nathan, President Trump is also escalating his campaign to pressure pharmaceutical companies to lower drug prices. And Bloomberg's John Tucker joins us with the very latest. John, good morning.
And good morning, Karen. In letters sent to Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, Pfizer, and others, Trump insisted the companies immediately lower what they charge Medicaid for existing drugs. He also asked them to guarantee that future medicines be launched and remain at prices on par with what they cost overseas. He gave the world's 17 largest drug makers 60 days to comply. If they don't, he writes, his administration will, quote, deploy every tool in our arsenal to protect American families. The pharmaceutical industry has long protested the idea of globally linked drug prices as a threat to years of U.S. dominance in biomedical research. They've urged the administration instead to turn its attention to the middlemen in the supply chain. Right now, in European trading, shares of Novo Nordisk down another 4.8%. That company loses its spot among Europe's 10 most valuable companies. Pfizer pre-market is down 0.6%. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, John, thank you. Earnings are also very much in focus this morning. We're watching shares of Amazon. They are down more than 8% pre-market. The online retail giant's projecting weaker than expected operating income and is trailing the sales growth of its cloud rivals. That has investors questioning whether Amazon's huge investments in artificial intelligence are paying off. Anurag Rana is a senior tech analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence.
You see, they met expectations on AWS growth of 17% in constant currency. But, this is where we are saying that this is probably not good enough because Microsoft beat by a big number, Google beat by a big number. And the big question is going to be, why didn't Amazon beat by a big number?
Bloomberg Intelligence's Anurag Rana says Amazon spent a record $31.4 billion on capital expenditures in the quarter. That was up about 90% from the same period a year earlier.
On the flip side, Nathan, shares of Apple are up more than 1.5%. The iPhone maker posted its fastest quarterly revenue growth in more than 3 years. Strong iPhone sales and a rebound in China helped beat estimates despite a projected tariff hit. Mark Gurman covers Apple for Bloomberg.
There are people who still have iPhones that are several years old, 4 to 6, even older years of iPhone, right? There's people on Android. There's people new to the smartphone market. And clearly, the impact of tariffs didn't have a negative impact on Apple. It had a positive impact on Apple. That's because a lot of people were anticipating major price hikes to the iPhone, and they flooded Apple retail stores.
Bloomberg's Mark Gurman says Apple predicted that fourth quarter revenue would be up by a percentage in the mid to high single digits. CEO Tim Cook also says the company is upping investment in artificial intelligence.
Well, this morning, Karen, the earnings focus turns from big tech to big oil. We'll hear from both ExxonMobil and Chevron. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
Investors at ExxonMobil eager to hear about the company's progress in developing a massive oil field in Guyana. Also, the latest shale production plans in the Permian Basin. Bloomberg consensus calls for revenue of $80.39 billion and adjusted earnings per share of $1.56. Chevron investors want to hear about the company's long-delayed but now completed acquisition of Hess and how that'll impact its share buyback plans. Bloomberg consensus calls for revenue of $46.75 billion on adjusted earnings per share of $1.71. Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Tom, thanks. A busy week on the economic front concludes this morning with the July jobs report. Economists are forecasting a gain of 104,000 jobs at an unemployment rate of 4.2%. Begin more with Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
Job growth will slow and unemployment will have ticked up in July, economists forecast, but it's not the end of the world or even the economic expansion. Once again, it's tariffs. Companies have been suspending guidance and announcing price increases to offset tariffs, but they have not yet resorted to cutting jobs. It won't matter much to the Fed if unemployment does rise by a tenth or so, but a quick jump to, say, 4.5% would worry policymakers who may take it as a signal policy is too tight. There will be time to consider the implications no matter what we get. The next Fed meeting is not until September 17th. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thanks. And speaking of the Fed, President Trump is keeping up his pressure campaign on Jay Powell to lower rates, once again taking to social media to criticize the Fed chair. Lyle Brainerd is a former vice chair of the Federal Reserve.
What has been surprising to me is to hear the president talk about lowering rates as though it is the Federal Reserve's responsibility to lower rates for U.S. Treasury debt management. And that, of course, is exactly how central banks go wrong in emerging markets.
Former Fed Vice Chair Lyle Brainerd also says she thinks the president's higher tariff rates will hamper economic growth.
And finally, Nathan, an end of an era. Ray Dalio has sold his last remaining stake in Bridgewater Associates and also left the hedge fund's board. Dalio first announced his succession plan more than a decade ago, but he did not fully hand over the reins until 2022 when he transferred his voting rights to its board of directors and stepped down as one of its 3 co-chief investment officers. He stayed on the board at the time, and Dalio founded the firm in 1975. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Storms have been lashing the East Coast from Virginia to Connecticut, flooding roadways in New York. Vehicles were stranded in pockets of high water and water pouring over a train in Manhattan's Grand Central Terminal. Commuter rail lines into suburban Long Island and New Jersey were suspended in places. Flash flood warnings in effect for parts of New York City, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. States of emergency have been declared in New Jersey and New York City. With more on the weather, here's Bloomberg meteorologist Craig Allen.
The deluge from last evening, that's gone. There are still some showers around. They'll be moving out of the area. All flood alerts have been canceled. I mean, it must have been frightening for some of those caught in the flooding rains that caused the flash flooding on some of the major interstates around the region.
Bloomberg meteorologist Craig Allen. The storms delayed flights from Boston to Washington, D.C. The NYPD and politicians gathered at the funeral Thursday for the officer killed in the Midtown Manhattan mass shooting this week. Diderol Islam was off-duty working security when he was fatally shot by a gunman at 345 Park Avenue. Islam is one of 3 funerals these past few days. Also yesterday, funeral services took place for Blackstone executive Wesley LePatner. Her 14-year-old daughter gave the eulogy.
My mom was like my rock. So yeah, I would talk to her, and I couldn't talk to anyone else. And nothing else would make it better.
Funeral services were held for Rudin employee Julia Hyman on Wednesday. Israel's military intelligence agency is undergoing changes. The service is making profound revisions, including reviving an Arabic language recruitment program for high school students and training all troops in Arabic and Islam. It comes after the October 7th, 2023 attack by Hamas. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Karen?
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Flushing Bank. And here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. It was let's make a deal day throughout baseball, and perhaps no team busier just before the trade deadline than the Yankees. They had already added 3 players. They added 4 more, 3 relief pitchers. David Bednar was a 2-time All-Star in Pittsburgh. Camilo Doval had over 100 career saves while in San Francisco. Jake Bird comes from Colorado. And then in the 8th inning of the Yanks' 7-4 win over Tampa Bay, they acquired a player who was in the opposing dugout. Jose Caballero has been baseball's best base stealer the past 2 seasons. Aaron Boone impressed with what the front office achieved.
Love what they were able to do. Think we're a better club today than yesterday, and certainly today than we were last week. And now we know what we were going with and what we got, and onward.
The win over the Rays, the 3rd in a row. They jumped to a 7-0 lead. It was 7-4 when there was a rain delay of nearly 3 hours and then no scoring after that. Yanks now 3.5 behind Toronto, playing tonight in Miami. The Mets host the Giants. Mets have a new center fielder. Cedric Mullins spent 8 seasons in Baltimore. A few years ago had 30 home runs and stolen bases. Carlos Correa going from Minnesota back to Houston, where he spent 7 years, helped the Astros win a World Series. The Red Sox landed pitcher Dustin May from the Dodgers. They beat May in a game a few days ago at Fenway. Taylor Rogers, whose twin brother Tyler was just acquired by the Mets, was traded for the 2nd day in a row. He's touring the NL Central, went from Cincinnati to Pittsburgh, and now the Cubs. A year ago, the Knicks sent a boatload of draft picks to the Nets from Mikal Bridges. He averaged 18 points a game, led the NBA in minutes played, and Bridges now has a new contract with the Knicks. 4 years, $150 million. He has never missed a game in his 7-year career. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. And Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by Flushing Bank. Life's more rewarding with Flushing Bank's complete cash rewards program for personal and business accounts. With 29 New York Metro locations, there's nothing more rewarding. Visit flushingbank.com, member FDIC.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Here it is, August 1st. And as promised, President Donald Trump has announced a slew of new tariff rates on countries around the world after announcing deals with a handful of them in recent weeks. But former U.S. trade negotiator Stephen Olson says he wouldn't call these deals.
What we've got here are a series of extremely vague framework agreements which will require additional negotiations before they're actually translated into anything even approximating what we could legitimately refer to a trade agreement.
Stephen Olson is now a senior fellow at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies. And for more, we're joined this morning by Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries. So, Bill, what do we have this morning? Good morning.
Good morning. We're here. It's been a long, bumpy road since those April 2nd Liberation Day tariffs were first announced. We've seen a lot of pauses and fits and starts since then. This does seem to be a kind of the moment now. President Trump, as you said, unleashed a whole slew of tariffs. Some big surprises in there. Some countries getting more than they bargained for. And I think the baseline rate of 10%, kind of a pleasant surprise to other countries who maybe had been expecting that to increase. So the market's kind of still digesting this. And it's there's still countries, big outliers there like China and India, still looking to make deals. So it does seem like the deadline has been reached, but there's still going to be a lot going on in the days and weeks ahead.
Well, let's get into that. What could we see over the next few days here, particularly when we're seeing, some countries like Switzerland and Canada getting hit with much higher rates than that 10% baseline you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think those are two of the big surprises, particularly Switzerland getting a 39% tariff when you consider that many of its neighbors who are EU nations got about a 15%. Switzerland, of course, exports a huge amount of pharmaceuticals to the U.S., so that's going to have an immediate hit on drug prices once that comes into effect August 7th. And out in Asia, you've seen countries or governments like Taiwan getting 20%, while two of its biggest rivals, Japan and South Korea, were at 15%. So the effect of these tariffs as it plays out in the days and weeks ahead is going to be shifting kind of the competitive landscape between countries that may, have typically competed in similar products but have different rates when it comes to exporting to the U.S.
To your point, I guess we've heard from Taiwan as well that they consider that 20% rate that you just mentioned temporary and that more negotiations could be to come. Is that what we should expect here, that even more of these countries could keep negotiating even after this August 1st deadline that's come and gone?
Yeah, I mean, so the August 1st deadline, that will those tariffs are supposed to kick in August 7th. In theory, I think there's going to be time there to negotiate. But yes, I think nations, if they've learned anything about President Trump, it's that he's a deal maker. He likes to make deals. The White House may feel like it has made those deals, but I think if a country comes in, if India or a Taiwan comes in and they say, they find a way to perhaps buy more American products or make some changes. I don't think that down the road I think we're going to see more deals getting tweaked, and that's what a lot of governments are going to be banking on going forward.
So if we do see these tariff rates kicking in, as you mentioned, on August 7th, once the U.S. Customs and Border Protection gets that time to adjust to this, what's the potential economic impact from where these tariff rates lie now?
It's a huge global economic experiment and an experiment for the U.S. economy. I mean, these U.S. tariffs are now going to be at the highest rate since World War II. And even if some countries are breathing a sigh of relief that they got just 10%, and I'm thinking, countries like Singapore, for instance, 10%, the average U.S. tariff was about 2% 6 months ago. So these are huge changes, and they will continue to trickle through into the U.S. economy. And it's hard to not see that starting to affect inflation more seriously in the months ahead.
And on top of all this, Bill, I guess we're still waiting for a lot of sectoral tariff announcements as well. I mean, what could that mean when it comes to certainty in the market?
Yeah, there is still a lot of uncertainty. There are products, pharmaceuticals, are chief among them. Semiconductors, those are still being subject to what the U.S. calls the Section 232 investigations to see if there's a national security risk. And presumably, if there are, that allows Donald Trump to put additional tariffs on those products. So by no means is this the end of it just because countries have gotten their number. Some of the products they export, Switzerland, I said 39%, but a big pharma exporter, they could be seeing increased tariffs on those products once the U.S. reaches those decisions.
And not the end of it, but maybe the market adjustment to what's happening now is just beginning. Thank you for this. Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferry's with us on this August 1st. Karen.
Nathan, we're also focusing on the markets and big tech earnings this morning. Shares of Amazon, they are down more than 8%. Apple up. It's higher by almost 2% right now, and this follows yesterday's After the Bell reports. For more, we're pleased to welcome Bloomberg Radio and TV anchor Kriti Gupta. Kriti, good morning. Hey, Kriti, let's start with Amazon because it's really hard to ignore the stock move this morning. What are investors reacting to?
Good morning, Karen. Yeah, it's been a really interesting tech earnings story. A tale of two, I think, is fair to say. Amazon shares down by 8%, trading about $215 a share. This is all about weakness when it comes to Amazon Web Services. When you think Amazon, we think about the packages, we think about the e-commerce business, but ultimately they are pivoting firmly in the tech direction, and that's where they've disappointed the market. Now, it doesn't help that we also got Microsoft earnings just 24 hours before, which really set a positive tone for cloud adoption for the Azure kind of services that they had. So the expectations were pretty high for Amazon to impress the market. And to be fair, they did in some ways. Their revenues did come in better than expected, but not by much. And this is a market that is very tough on tech companies right now, that the expectations are high and you have to be even better than the expectations. You have to get an A++ instead of just an A+. And this is where Amazon kind of finds itself right now. because they're also talking about weaker than expected operating income, as well as some of the sales growth when it comes to AWS. So that big idea of spend big on AI, spend big on cloud, and see that kind of multiply ultimately over time. That's the shadow of doubt that's being cast from Wall Street this morning.
And it really did seem like CEO Andy Jassy had a longer view when it came to all of this, but he still couldn't ease those concerns on the earnings call, could he?
He couldn't. He's trying to use that magic word that I think we've seen, and not just the tech companies and the tech space, but across corporate America and arguably the global corporate sphere, which is artificial intelligence. And there was an era where every time you said artificial intelligence, the stock would just spike because of this kind of momentum-driven story. And he's making that point. He says, look, we're very early days in that investment story. We know Amazon has that massive Anthropic venture as well, and they are competing with the likes of Alphabet, Microsoft, Oracle, among others as well in the cloud space. There, he's saying give it some time. But this is now at a point where Wall Street is looking at these AI kind of expectations, looking at these AI investments and say, when is it going to pay off? And Andy Jassy wasn't able to make that case.
All right, well, we're seeing better reaction to Apple this morning. It reported fastest revenue growth in more than 3 years. What else did you take away from this?
You know, it's funny because we go into Amazon with such a strong earnings expectations. With Apple, you went in with some pretty beat up earnings expectations. The idea that the tariff story would really eat into the bottom line, would eat into the supply chains, especially as Apple tries to move their supply chain from China to India. And you actually saw the opposite on two key fronts. One, that so much of those tariff fears actually showed up in people buying iPhones ahead of time, expecting the prices to go up. So that was good news for their bottom line revenue, but also the fact that they are actually doing better than expected in China. And this has been a key sticking point for Apple because Apple is ultimately an American luxury product. There are plenty of competitors in Asia as well, and they haven't been able to have the foothold and the growth in that part of the world that they were really hoping for, to the point that just this week it's been reported that they shuttered their first retail store in China, really kind of showing that weakness that they've had there. I think it's crucial, though, that Apple has, at least today, convinced investors that that is no longer the narrative. The question now moving forward is, can it sustain that growth in the iPhone picture, but also in Asia?
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.